Hi, ladies. In this podcast, I will be wrapping up chapter 33, Modern Art of the Early 20th Century, and I'll be covering the artworks that we did not get to in class. I'll also be recording a separate podcast as a test review for your test on Monday on the whole chapter, on chapter 33. So we did not get to this work in class, and this was a work that was added to the list by College Board, one that I was not familiar with previously, and it turns out that I was missing out because after researching this work a little bit, I really came to like it a lot. I think it's, formally very interesting, and the backstory is also pretty cool. So the artist is Wilfredo Lamb, who was from Cuba, was done in 1943. The title is The Jungle. And note that we have a new medium here. I'm not sure we've seen this one yet. So this is gouache on paper mounted on canvas. And gouache is just kind of like watercolor, very similar to watercolor. And the painting at first view, you can kind of see different styles kind of mishmashed into one. So cubist is the first style that I think you could probably pull out of here. You see a lot of angular shapes going on. So more influence of Cubism and Picasso going on. And then down here I have two others listed for you. Okay, and all of this information I pulled from Khan Academy. So I really would recommend you going to Khan Academy and reading about this a little bit more in depth, because I'm really just covering the highlights. But you see some Afro-Caribbean influence going on here, particularly with the bright colors, the bright color scheme. And then you also have these mask-like figures kind of hidden throughout the work, which is clearly African, okay? We also saw this in another painting by our friend Picasso, okay, The Women of Avignon. And it also has surrealist tendencies as well, okay? First of all, the composition is very cluttered. We do not really have this sense of foreground, middle ground, background. It's all kind of squished into one picture plane. And then you have some dreamlike subject matter going on. These figures with the extremely long legs and gigantic feet. You have this hand kind of poking out from the sugar cane. That's what all of this is, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. A hand kind of poking out from the sugar cane, holding on to these big shears. And just all kinds of weird, dreamlike things going on. Additionally, the sugar cane is important. So the title of the painting is The Jungle, but we see sugar cane everywhere. That's what these large stalks are. And you wouldn't really see sugar cane in a jungle, so there's kind of a disconnect there. But the reasoning for that is because Lamb was from Cuba. So he's making a comment on what is going on in Cuba in the 1940s, which is people outside of Cuba kind of get this image of Cuba as being this island nation, this tropical oasis, this sort of playground type place, all right, based on, travel posters that they see and things like that. The reality of it is that a large part of the Cuban population at this time were toiling away in the sugarcane fields, harvesting sugar, because this was Cuba's largest export at the time. And they are toiling in the fields for companies that are run by the United States. All right. So Lamb is obviously commenting on, the unfairness of this perception that people have of Cuba and the reality of what's really going on there. So this is a really interesting work that you need to know. The next work that I want to talk about is from Jacob Lawrence's Migration of the Negro, or the Migration series. The painting that College Board has chosen for us is number 49 from the Migration of the Negro done in 1940 to 1941. Also note that there is a new media, well, not new, but there's kind of a return of a media that we studied a while ago. So before the invention of oil paint, we saw a lot of tempera paintings, and so that's what we're looking at here. This is tempera on masonite or tempera on board. And the Migration of the Negro is a series, so it is many paintings. They're pretty small, and it turns out that the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C. got the odd numbers from the Migration series, and MoMA in New York got the even numbers. So I would really recommend trying to see those if you're ever in New York or if you're ever in DC, because they're really best viewed all together. And the purpose of this painting series is to depict the injustices and the discrimination that African Americans endured during and directly after the Civil War in the United States. So it documents their migration from the rural South to the North and some of the struggles that they went through. And really what we're looking at here is a group of people in a cafe. And you see this divider right down the center of the work, dividing the African Americans on the right and the whites on the left. And I have these words, bleakness and degradation of the African American life in here. And you really get that sense from this work because, the white people on the left are kind of turned away. You see this one figure here who's looking the other way. The other one has his head kind of buried in a newspaper. So they really want nothing to do with the people on the other side of the divider there, you know. So people are dining, people are reading, typical things that you would do in a cafe. However, it's very separated. And here are a couple more works from the series. So you can see that Lawrence's style is pretty consistent throughout. You see patches of bright colors, simplified forms, and more influence of Cubism with the geometric shapes and flat planes of color. The next artist I want to talk about is Constantin Brancusi, and this is his Bird in Space. There is a version of this in the Museum of Modern Art, and there's also a version of it in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So if you get a chance to go to the Philly Art Museum, you can see this and a bunch of his other sculptures. They're kind of grouped together in a little room there, and it's pretty cool. He really is into this new, sleek, minimalist, abstract style. So most of his sculptures are very minimalist looking, which is kind of going along with this new De Stijl architecture, this new Cubist movement going on, the simplification of forms. He really loved that. So this is his Bird in Space done in bronze. And the required sculpture for Brancusi is the Kiss, which is right up here on the right. And this is actually limestone, which I think is important to note because we've been seeing marble over and over again, bronze over and over again. And now we're seeing the return of this sort of ancient sculpting material of limestone. It's also very cube-like, very simplistic, but we do have some details here. Obviously, it is a couple embracing, and if you watch the Khan Academy video, which I highly recommend, I have it linked for you right here, you can see it from multiple angles, which is always good. So you can see that on the other ends of the sculpture, you can see the couple's hands kind of wrapping around, and it is a man and a woman embracing. The commentators in the video talk about how the woman is just slightly smaller than the man. and how their eyes kind of interlock at the same space, almost forming this cyclops-like eye. And I also put a couple other images of his sculptures, just in case you get an attribution question for Brancusi, which I could see that happening. You know, they may pick one of these other really simplified organic sculptures that he's made. So it's good for you to see a couple different styles. But if you have time, definitely watch the Khan Academy on this sculpture. And remember, we have two artworks called The Kiss. We have Gustav Klimt's painting The Kiss, that gold leaf um, painting of a couple embracing. And then we have a sculpture called The Kiss by Brancusi. End with our last required work and talk to you a little bit about the Mexican muralists. So the Mexican muralists, and there are a couple, but we want to talk mostly about Diego Rivera, who, as I told you in class, was married to Frida Kahlo, and they had this very tumultuous relationship, which she often depicted in some of her paintings. He was a staunch Marxist, and so many of his paintings are politically charged. A lot of his paintings include images from the indigenous history of Mexico, and he was famous for his murals. So this is the mural in our book called Ancient Mexico, and I think this is a really cool image of the mural because you can see it in the space where it was originally painted in the National Palace in Mexico City. So, you know, they're all fresco paintings, they're very, very large, bright colors, and focus on political messages and indigenous Mexico. The required work that you need to know is this Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in the Alameda Park, done in 1947 to 1948. And it's very, very large. It is supposed to be sort of this image of the indigenous peoples of Mexico on the left, the uprising of the Mexican Revolution and the Mexican bourgeoisie in the center, and then a modern representation of Mexico on the right. So you definitely want to take a look at some of the details in the painting because it is so large. So you can find those online. This is a detail from the uprising portion of the fresco. So you see a lot of figures kind of jumbled together, a lot of violence going on. All of the men are holding guns. You see this figure right here shooting someone. So just this sense of chaos and violence going on in that uprising portion of the fresco. And so that detail that I was just talking about can be found right here. The next portion of the painting that I want to show you is this central portion, which is actually really interesting because it's, you know, a big contrast to this portion of the painting, which is so chaotic and there's all this violence going on. The center of the painting is a bunch of famous surrealist artists, including Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, um, just standing here peacefully, kind of gazing out at us. And we have this weird skeleton looking figure. So I want to zoom in on that and talk a little bit about who those people are and why they're being depicted. Here is that close-up of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, again pictured as a young boy, which is kind of weird. Remember when we looked at her double self-portrait and he was depicted in that locket as a young boy. And she's clutching onto a yin yang, all right, which in Chinese philosophy means opposing forces yet interdependent forces, which completely sums up their relationship since it was so tumultuous. They learned from each other, they were influenced by one another. He started out as being her mentor, yet they fought constantly and he was unfaithful all the time. This central figure here is called a Katrina, which was an image of a Mexican bourgeoisie dressed in European clothing, wearing this fancy hat with plumes kind of coming out of it. And here that is really used to critique the Mexican elite, sort of this image of death kind of mishmashed with this elite bourgeoisie woman. And that wraps it up, ladies.